They told us the house sold in record time, 2 weeks and done, end of story, right? Except that is not the real story, and if you blinked, you missed a detail that changes everything. Because this wasn't a smooth sale or a lucky break, it was a rushed exit, forced by problems no one wanted to talk about. Problems that had been growing quietly for years, behind walls, under tile, and out of sight. And once those problems were exposed, the truth couldn't be controlled anymore. So stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will see why this move wasn't about opportunity, it was about escape. Hi besties, welcome back. And before we even get comfortable, before anyone thinks they know where this story is going, I need you to stay with me, because the truth about this house, the timeline, the excuses, and what was quietly happening behind the scenes is far more unsettling than anything that ever made it onto the show. And that is exactly why this matters so much, because what was presented as a fast, impressive sale, a miracle even, was actually the final chapter of a problem that had been growing, festering, and ignored for years. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and you will start to question everything that was said, every smile, every casual comment, every moment where they acted surprised by circumstances they themselves created. Because when Kody proudly says the house sold in 2 weeks, and when Robin nods along and minimizes and reframes and softens, what that actually means, what they are really doing, is redirecting your attention away from the one detail that changes the entire story, which is that the house was not ready to be sold, not livable, not up to standard, and not something any buyer could simply walk into without conditions and demands and delays. And that alone tells you that the narrative we were given was never complete, because a house does not suddenly reveal massive issues only after you decide to move, unless those issues were already there, waiting to be discovered and ignored for convenience. And that is where this begins, not with the sale, but with the moment they decided to leave. Because from that moment forward, the house became a liability rather than a home. And every choice after that was about escape, not responsibility. And that is why the problems suddenly seem to appear all at once. Because once a buyer and an inspector are involved, you can no longer pretend that a leak is minor, or that damage is cosmetic, or that time will somehow fix what neglect has allowed to grow. And when Kody says the house didn't want them to leave, what he is really saying without realizing it is that the house had been signaling for a long time that something was wrong, and those signals were ignored until they became impossible to hide. And this is where the suspense really lies, because viewers were told this was about logistics, stress, timing, and inconvenience. But in reality, it was about remediation. And remediation is not a word you hear unless there is something unsafe, something unhealthy, something that cannot be ignored. And when remediation companies are called, it means contamination. And contamination means mold. And mold, especially black mold, does not form overnight. It grows slowly, quietly, behind walls, under tile, beneath showers, fed by moisture and neglect. And the most telling part of all is not that the mold existed, but that it spread enough to require demolition, because that tells us the leak was not new, it was persistent and unresolved. And while Kody speaks as though this was an unfortunate discovery that coincided with their move, the truth is that a home with a leaking pipe behind a shower does not suddenly become dangerous the moment you decide to sell it. It becomes dangerous the moment you choose not to fix it. And the longer you wait, the worse it gets. And that delay is not accidental, it is a choice. And that choice is more about priorities than any confession ever could. And this is where the story shifts, because now we are no longer talking about a fast sale or a hot market or lucky timing. We are talking about a home that could not pass inspection without major work, a buyer who refused to close until those problems were addressed, and a seller who could not walk away until the damage was repaired, because the law and the lender would not allow it. And suddenly that 2-week celebration starts to feel hollow, because an offer is not a sale, and a contract is not a closing, and a promise is not proof. And Robin knows this, which is why her language is careful. She says it's sold, but it just needs to close, because that phrasing blurs the line between achievement and obligation and keeps the illusion intact just long enough for the cameras and for the audience. But the reality is that nothing was final until the mold was gone, the shower rebuilt, the walls repaired, and the deck made safe. And that takes time, money, and effort, all things that had apparently been postponed until there was no other choice. And this is where viewers should lean in, because this pattern is not isolated. It mirrors how issues have been handled repeatedly: delay, minimize, deflect, and only act when forced. And when Kody talks about contractors being on the spot as though this is some extraordinary event, he reveals just how disconnected he is from basic responsibility. Because people do not show up to fix your home out of kindness. They show up because you pay them. And when you have to suddenly coordinate multiple companies at once, it is usually because the problem has reached a point where it can no longer be ignored. And that is exactly what happened here. Because mold remediation requires containment, demolition, treatment, drying, and verification before rebuilding can even begin. And that process alone tells you this was not a surface issue, it was structural. And once walls are opened, once tile is removed, once contamination is exposed, there is no going back and no pretending. And that is why the house could not close, because no buyer, especially one paying cash, would accept responsibility for a known health hazard when the sellers are legally required to disclose and resolve it. And that brings us to the financial tension underneath this entire situation, because repairs of this magnitude are not cheap. And when a home is being treated as a temporary vessel rather than a long-term investment, maintenance becomes optional until it becomes unavoidable. And this philosophy shows itself clearly in how quickly they were ready to leave once the problem surfaced. Because rather than address the home as a place to preserve, they treated it as something to unload and move on from. And that mindset has consequences, because houses remember neglect, even when people try to forget. And once the inspection happens, the truth comes out. And that is why the timeline matters so much, because 2 weeks sounds impressive until you realize that the clock did not stop there. The work delayed the closing, the repairs dictated the schedule, and the sale was only possible once the damage was undone. And even then, the damage had already told its story. And the most unsettling part is how casually all of this is discussed, as though severe mold damage is just another inconvenience, another hurdle, another annoyance standing between them and their next chapter. When in reality, it represents years of deferred responsibility and the potential risk to anyone living in that space. And that is why viewers feel unsettled, even if they cannot articulate it, because something about this story does not sit right. And that feeling comes from the gap between what is being said and what is being revealed unintentionally. Because when someone explains too much, they often expose the truth without meaning to. And every mention of remediation, every reference to inspections, every careful correction from Robin adds another layer to the picture. And that picture is not of a smooth, successful transition, but of a rushed exit complicated by problems that could no longer be hidden. And this is why this story keeps pulling people back. Because it is not just about a home, it's about patterns, accountability, and the way narratives are constructed to protect an image even when the facts are quietly contradicting it. And we are only at the beginning, because once you start looking at this house through that lens, everything else starts to line up. And the timing, the finances, the language, and the urgency all tell the same story of a problem that was never sudden, only finally exposed. And once you understand that the sale was never the victory lap it was presented as, everything else starts to unravel in a way that feels almost uncomfortable to watch. Because the more they talk, the clearer it becomes that this was not about timing or luck or market conditions, but about pressure and exposure and the inability to keep certain realities hidden once outsiders were involved. And this is where the tension deepens, because a home inspection does not care about excuses. It does not care about intent. It does not care about narrative. It only cares about facts. And the facts were sitting behind tile and drywall long before the cameras showed up. And when the buyer demanded repairs before closing, that was not a personal attack. It was a boundary, and one that forced accountability where there had been none. And that is why the closing stalled, and why the stress escalated, and why suddenly the house became a burden instead of an asset. Because when you are required to fix something you have ignored for years, it feels overwhelming, not because it is impossible, but because it exposes the cost of avoidance. And that cost is not just financial, it is emotional, reputational, and structural. And the way Kody speaks about the process reveals a frustration that goes deeper than inconvenience, because there is an underlying sense of being wronged by the house itself, as though the damage was something that happened to them, rather than something that developed under their watch. And that mindset is telling, because it shifts responsibility outward and frames neglect as bad luck. And that framing has been used before in other areas where accountability would require reflection and change. And instead, the focus stays on how unfair it feels to deal with consequences. And when Robin steps in to soften or reframe, it is not accidental, it is strategic. Because language matters, especially when you are trying to preserve an image. And saying the house is sold feels cleaner than saying the house cannot close until it is made safe. And that distinction matters because one implies success while the other implies obligation. And viewers may not consciously catch it, but they feel it. And that feeling keeps them watching because something is off and unresolved. And the longer the conversation goes, the more the cracks show. Because if the house truly sold so easily, why the rush to explain the repairs? Why the emphasis on contractors? Why the repeated insistence that people showed up and worked hard? Because those details are unnecessary unless there is a need to justify a delay. And that delay is the story they do not want to center. And the truth is that homes with severe mold issues do not quietly go away once discovered. They require documentation, clearance, testing, and proof that remediation was successful. And that means time and oversight. And the buyer was not going to take that on, and neither would a lender or an insurer. And so the sellers had no choice but to comply. And that is why the house felt like it did not want them to leave, because it was demanding attention it had been denied. And when you ignore a problem long enough, it eventually demands everything at once. And this pattern echoes far beyond real estate, because it shows how short-term thinking creates long-term fallout, and how treating homes as temporary vehicles rather than spaces to care for leads to cycles of damage and repair that never truly resolve. And that is why the mention of loans and equity becomes relevant, because when a house is used primarily as leverage, maintenance becomes secondary, and problems are tolerated until they threaten liquidity. And that appears to be exactly what happened here, because the repairs were not initiated out of care, but out of necessity. And that difference matters.
Matters because it explains the tone, the frustration, and the urgency. And when Kody speaks about how hard it was to coordinate workers, it feels disconnected from reality, because people coordinate repairs every day without drama, unless they are overwhelmed by the scope of the work. And the scope here was significant, and that significance contradicts the casual way the situation was initially described. And that contradiction is what keeps viewers engaged, because they sense the mismatch between words and reality. And that is where suspense lives, in the space between what is shown and what is implied. And the more details emerge, the more that space fills with questions about what else was ignored, what else was postponed, and what else will surface later. Because patterns do not end with one house, they follow behavior. And when a new home is already structured in a way that prioritizes flexibility over permanence, it suggests that this cycle is not over. And that knowledge adds a layer of unease, because viewers are not just watching a past event, they are anticipating a future one. And that anticipation keeps them from clicking away, because they want to see if history repeats itself. And the way this story is told invites that curiosity, because it never fully resolves. It hints and circles and deflects without closing the loop. And that unresolved tension is intentional, whether consciously or not, because closure would require acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would require responsibility. And that is the one thing consistently avoided. And so instead, we are given fragments, explanations that almost make sense, details that seem reasonable until you put them together and realize the bigger picture. And that picture is not flattering because it shows a home deteriorating quietly while attention was focused elsewhere and only being addressed when it threatened a financial outcome. And that realization reframes the entire move, not as an exciting transition, but as an exit driven by necessity. And once you see it that way, the celebration of speed feels hollow because speed without stability is just momentum, and momentum can carry you forward even when the foundation is compromised. And that is what makes this story compelling, because it is not just about what happened, it is about what it reveals and what it suggests about how future situations will be handled. And that question hangs in the air unresolved, pulling viewers forward because they are not just watching for information, they are watching for confirmation of a pattern. And that is why the story does not end with the sale. It lingers because the issues that led to it are still very much present, and the silence around them speaks louder than any explanation ever could. So when you look back at this sale and strip away the celebration, the timelines, and the carefully chosen words, what you are left with is not a success story, but a warning about what happens when problems are delayed instead of handled. Because houses don't forget neglect. They eventually demand accountability. And once that moment arrives, no narrative can cover it up. And the real question isn't how fast this house sold, it's what happens next when the same patterns follow them forward, and whether the truth will surface again, even louder next time.